Greetings, Clausewitz here. So in this video I want to talk about the rapier. Basically how was it used in the military context of the time, of course. Basically also, did it had a role or a place actually on battlefields or not? Because this is an often recurring question that I was asked from a viewer, like what is my take on it, because I made a very similar video about this subject but on another type of weapon, about the greatsword of the late Middle Ages and Renaissance. So, and about the rapiers, there's often actually this discussion on online, of course, where else, that was it just used for duels, or was it still also used by soldiers on battles? And often people say no, it was a dueling weapon sometimes, or even sometimes, and also often, basically there are those two big opinions out there. It was used on the battlefield. And I even saw Matt Easton from Schola Gladiatoria and Chad from Shadversity that they actually claim as well it was used on the battlefield. Matt Easton specifically said because we can see it in the art of the day, like worn by soldiers, by officers, by citizens alike. And first of all, before I want to go into my arguments, I want to state here that I don't regard like art as good evidence or strong evidence. It's, of course, they are hints. You can, of course, hints, like I said, and of course can be used in cross-reference. But art for itself, it's not a strong evidence. And I will make an own video about this, because this would be too long in here, so that you see my reasoning why. But just accept the premise for this video right now, that I don't consider art as good evidence, therefore I dismiss this point here. But look at this claim, or at this question, was it a battlefield weapon or not? First of all, what I really mean with rapier, because there can be some confusion around. Normally, today on YouTube, in this kind of community, most people agree what a rapier is, but I just want to clarify myself, of course, because not everybody watching this will be really have the exact same knowledge as I. So the point is, what I mean with rapier is a sword design of the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance, which is a one-handed sword, I put a picture in here as well, with a complex guard, often a longer blade than relative to this other one-handed swords, and a thrust-centric blade. So it was therefore not able to cut, or very poor in the cut, or strike if you want to. Very thin blade often, because it was in the mass basically like any other sword, but longer, therefore basically stretching out the metal. A very important note for this as well is that often in sources back then, in historical sources, the word rapier wasn't so specifically used for such designs. It was often wider used, or even not at all. So you could have just be called everything a sword, or a longsword even, or everything could be called a rapier, because there was other sword designs around there back which were basically very similar but had very different blades. They were often just usually double-edged cutting swords, which were pretty similar to the arming swords, the standard one-handed sword of the Middle Ages, and just with the guard of the day. But I refer specifically to those thrust-centric weapons, because those were often shown in the treatises as dueling weapons. Also, they make much sense as a dueling weapon. Matt Easton talks a lot about this aspect in his videos at Schola Gladiatoria, and because it is very long, it keeps people on, as your enemy at distance. It's very thrust-centric, of course, to emphasize then the stance, the attacks, complex guard, of course, absence of armor and everything, and this hand you holding the weapon is actually nearest point to your enemy's blade, therefore, of course, protecting it pretty well is a good idea. And yeah, this is the design I'm referring to here. So, and when I look into the circumstances of the time, which is basically mercenary warfare, so all those things I talked in my pike video and my Swiss mercenary video, we see pike formations, we see at this point even often muskets and to some extent cannons and pistols, all this good stuff is around. And now the question is, does the rapier fit in here or not? So first of all, it is a specialized weapon, obviously. Like I said, it's there for keeping enemy at distance, to a high distance. Also emphasize the thrust, and therefore drops cutting capabilities. So at first you may think it's a good weapon for the scenario, because this is basically what pikemen do. They keep the enemy at distance, and of course thrust at him, because it's the easiest position, and also to maintain this defensive positioning, so you can attack him, threatening him as well. But the point is that actually this is why it doesn't work, because the pike is so specialized, it just excels at this task. So a pike against a rapier, the pike is at a huge advantage. So to just put somebody with a rapier here is pretty much useless, and also can't do anything against the other pikemen. You really need own pikemen for this, or ranged attacks, but this is also with rapier actually is not the point anymore. But what is about cavalry? They can probably use a sword often, many times, because they also attack with swords often for quick attacks, or they maybe don't have ammunition anymore and have to fight other cavalrymen, stuff like this. And this was a theme like still until the like American Civil War was it relevant. And yeah, it is relevant in the sense of they need a good sword for this task, but the rapier, like thrust centric, is actually not as good as here. Not that it doesn't work, but the long the long blade is of course an advantage on a horse, but the pure thrust centricness is here an issue, because of course you can avoid or basically miss with the thrust much easier, especially on moving targets, than with a cut or a strike, which just strikes at a larger area than the thrust, of course. And the next thing is as well, the rapier is not designed to pierce armor. Therefore, as well here, if you have to fight against other cavalrymen with armor, infantry with armor, shoot like thrust on them, doesn't really do anything. And therefore, especially a blade which also has a very flexible blade, which can then of course glance more easily from something, to have a spear or lance is often pretty much better. So they all need basically a more cutting related sword, like also something like a saber maybe, but basically here comes the side sword, is very prominent here. Actually in German language you'd also call it not only the directly same name like Seitschwert, which is just side sword in German, but we also call it Reitschwert, which means like rider sword. So basically because it was a very famous weapon for cavalrymen. And like I said, it was just like the standard cut and thrust sword, but with the designs of the day, most obvious the complex guard. Not something very special actually. So, but what is with backup weapons? Because swords were of course often backup weapons. This is true, this is a very good thing for a sword, or like a sword-like weapon, like also like daggers or knives. And does it play here a good role? I would say better than as a primary weapon. But also when we now look at it, like when do you use the backup weapon? Basically when you're lost or have to abandon your primary weapon, can be a musket, can be a pike, or halberd, something like this, because the formation crumbles, because the circumstances doesn't fit anymore, like something's in the way, or basically the enemy is too close right now. There were, by the way, actually special troops, not special troops, but men specialized just for running under the pikes of the enemy, or of their own formation as well, to then of course cut and stab like feet or legs, and also stuff like this to cut the guys open. So what if something like this happens, then you need your side weapons. So, and here's the point, that the rapier of course can be used, but as well there's the same thing with the pikes, that there are so many options, so much better for the situations, like shorter weapons, daggers, knives, maybe axes and clubs as well. You can of course strike people like with the blade, even if it can't cut, but it's still a metal bar. Also you can of course strike them with the guard. But this also counts for every other weapon, and if I am able to hit something with the blade-ish object of the weapon, then of course I can also do it if it's really a blade, like a side sword or a Katzbeil, which is just like a short sword, very often used by Landsknechts. So just have a regular sword, which also does a much better job, and this is again a better idea, and even better if the sword can also be better used in very close combat, because rapier again is very long. Therefore, to have a weapon which is generally shorter than average weapons, or average length, is still more advantages than the rapier. It doesn't need to keep any more distance here. Actually, this instance is kinda over. You have to kill them, you have to defend them yourself against them immediately. So the rapier doesn't fit in here as well anymore. Still can work, don't deny this. And I can imagine if you're more like a musketeer, which is like in an odd scenario, suddenly has to fight. Maybe he has to support and flank the enemy and just attack them there, or he has to defend himself in like a skirmish scenario or a scouting scenario, or even like when he is getting chased, something like this, that the rapier is maybe even better, because it's not everything is so tight around him, so he has more room to use for the rapier. But basically, like I said, there's even a versatility thing again, because rapier is still thrust centric, still long. to have a sword or weapon which is more versatile, it's often therefore better overall. Like I said, armor is also a thing, so I have something which can deal with armor to some extent, and basically everything gets better or as good with armor as the rapier. I would say even everything does better, because even like a side sword, still the whole cutting, striking capabilities are much better suited against armor than the rapier, and it has still thrust. So basically, you see, my conclusion is it wasn't often used. It doesn't have a place on the battlefield at this time. I would suggest it wasn't mainly used for duels, and the thing is, I can of course imagine that some people had it because they thought it's a good idea, or they just grabbed what they already had, or they just bought what they could buy at this point, or plundered what they could plunder at this point, and just used what they had, still better than like nothing. But I can also imagine that the whole pricing thing was actually a big issue here, because when the weapons are more for, of course, civilian use, it's not so much that they got bought much often. I mean, for war you need many weapons, they break, you need to have many mans, they are so much more used, so much more under hard pressure, therefore breaking them get damaged a lot more often, therefore you need more weapons. So you have then this mass production weapon scale, because okay, the army needs all those things, or even you get as a producer, you even get like the task, you get the offer of like, hey, producing us this amount of weapon. And then you have of course those single buyers in the civilian life, and also because it was a prestige thing as well, it has to of course look good, I have to follow fashion. Which maybe increased like the frequency of buying a new one, but maybe just replace the hilt. I can imagine. So, but I can also imagine that they were often much more fancier, which is what people do when it's about prestige. So of course, competing with each other about luxury, about which looks better, which is better, in quotes, and on and on. So therefore, it also was more work involved than many rapiers, which also increased the price again. Not as military weapons, because they don't give a fuck, and he wants this mass of weapons. You have to be quick and everything, and it has to be okay quality basically, and everything is fine. So that actually, if you would have to buy weapons, if it be as a commander to supply your own troops, or as a soldier to supply yourself with equipment, then of course you would see in most cases more like cheaper daggers or shorter swords or side swords than rapiers. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel if you already did. I talk about military stuff in here, and hopefully see you soon.